خاکت ای امامی حق جهان خواهد گرفت کرده برو بر منور آسمان خواهد گرفت کرده برو بر منور آسمان خواهد گرفت در لباسی ظاهرت گشته و ویدا پیش خلق نور حق بینت مقامی لا مکان خواهد گرفت نور حق بینت مقامی لا مکان خواهد گرفت یا امامی حق یا شاکری یا امامی حق یا شاکری سرشار حبری رحمتان رونقی دینی مبین بر دیگران خواهد گرفت رونقی دینی مبین بر دیگران خواهد گرفت در دل یارها دمی گر جای گرفتم میری تو تا ابد راهی امین او را امان خواهد گرفت تا ابد راهی امین او را امان خواهد گرفت یا امامی حق یا شاکری یا امامی حق یا شاکری ای شای سرور جلوگر در کوی دوست خاک پایت را بسر بامی جهان خواهد گرفت خاک پایت را بسر بامی جهان خواهد گرفت شام تاریکی مریدان را به نورت برفروز قاف تا قافی جهان پرتوازان خواهد گرفت قاف تا قافی جهان پرتوازان خواهد گرفت یا امامی حق یا شاکری یا امامی حق یا شاکری یا امامی حق یا شاکری یا امامی حق یا شاکری
Yalimalad, welcome, bienvenue, and Imamat Day Mubarak. My name is Zain Velji, and thank you for joining us for another installment of Friday Night Reflections. You know, it's been a while since we've seen each other, and I have to say, and I say this to each one of you at home, you're looking great. You know, a lot has happened since Navroz, far too much to get into here, but I hope you and your families are keeping safe and healthy. This weekend also marks the beginning of the Calgary Stampede. Yes, that 10-day event from my hometown in Calgary. By the way, I'm speaking to you in Toronto, in the only redeeming part of Toronto, everything else overrated. But that place in Calgary where we talk about pancakes and our indulgences of hats. But I'm here to talk about something else related to Calgary, that debate regarding Yahoo or Yeehaw. And let me tell you, let me settle it for once, it's whichever one you want. That is directed to one Mayor Nenshi who has a real clear preference. On this day, we're commemorating the 65th anniversary of Mawlana Hazar Imam's Imamat. This is a milestone year, also known as the Blue Sapphire year, in case anyone was wondering. This also marks 50 years of major settlement of our Ismaili community here in Canada. With so many milestones, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to reflect on these anniversaries. We will start with the milestones of Mawlana Hazar Imam's Imamat. Dr. Mahmoud Eboo, the representative of the delegation of the Ismaili Imamat to Canada, will join me in conversation on this topic. We'll delve into the work Mawlana Hazar Imam has undertaken over the past 65 years, why he's chosen to undertake these projects, why some Imamat days are jubilees, and the spirit of celebration in our community. We conclude, as we usually do, with our soulful sounds, tonight with a special premiere of a work by K4. This is a fair amount to cover, so let us get started right away. I hope you're settled in for my conversation with Dr. Mahmoud Eboo. Dr. Mahmoud Eboo serves as the representative of the delegation of the Ismaili Imamat to Canada. Born in Kenya and educated at Harrow School in England, he obtained a BSc in Materials Technology in 1975 and subsequently a PhD in Laser Engineering in 1979 from Imperial College of Science and Technology, London University. In 1983, he moved to the USA where he co-founded Quantum Laser, an FAA-certified company specializing in the manufacture, repair, and refurbishment of gas turbine airfoils for the aviation and power generation industries. Quantum Laser was sold to Honeywell in 2001. Dr. Eboo was appointed as His Highness the Aga Khan's and the AKDN's resident representative to Canada in September 2014, following the signing of a protocol of understanding between the Ismaili Imamat and the Government of Canada in February 2014. Dr. Eboo also served as the chairman of the Ismaili Leaders International Forum, LIF, until 2019. He's also been a member of the institutional leadership of the Ismaili Muslim community in the USA and internationally for the past 35 years. Here now is my conversation with Dr. Mahmoud Eboo. Dr. Eboo, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having this conversation. And more importantly, I appreciate having it in the flesh. We're not seeing each other on a 2D Zoom screen or a Microsoft Teams meeting. We're actually in person, no lag in having this conversation. So I appreciate you being here and chatting.
Not at all. It's always a pleasure to be on Friday Night Reflections. And I'm glad it's an opportunity that we've managed to arrange in real time for us to actually have this conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to having a chat with you.
Yeah, and if we can just get right into it, you know, we want to talk about this obviously milestone year, 65 years that we're celebrating, but I want to kind of view it through the lens of legacy and legacies, perhaps even plural. You know, in your mind, what does kind of legacy mean from a community or even institutional perspective? And if I can ask you maybe even beyond that, you know, how does Mawlana Hazar Imam kind of view legacies and the work that he's done from this long arc of history or even longitudinal sense?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's actually a very important question to ask. People are perhaps not necessarily familiar with this notion of a legacy and what it represents. But the way I would position it is to say, you know, a legacy is a program, an enterprise, an institution, a project that has been built for the benefit of a community, a benefit of society, over multi-generational over a multi-generational viewpoint. And Hazar Imam has looked at this, and you can look at you can actually look at examples of legacy projects even with governments. So if you take, for example, Social Security in the United States,
sure,
that's a legacy program.
Yes.
It ultimately had a benefit and an impact which is still there today, decades after it was conceived of, at a time of crisis in the United States, when people needed support and an infrastructure to help them get through a terrible crisis. In the same way, there are legacies that the Imams, plural, have built over time. So you can look at more recently, if you take the example of Sultan Muhammad Shah. Sultan Muhammad Shah built a legacy which was rooted in the Diamond Jubilee of the establishment of financial institutions. So here we have now 7 decades later, 8 decades later, financial institutions, whether they're banks or insurance companies, that have been established to provide an underpinning for the financial inclusivity and the financial benefit, not only of the Jamat, but for the societies in which they live. That's an example of a legacy program. And you can go back historically and look at legacies that the Imams of the time have built all the way back to Fatimid times. And you can look at the establishment of Hazar as an institution at the time. It had a lifespan and the vision of the Imam of the time of thousands of years.
Yes.
Right? And the Imam today, Mawlana Hazar Imam, has sought to build on these legacies. So they are not, created in isolation of a mandate that the Imam has. The Imam is building on or creating new legacies that are building on legacies of the past.
You know, what I find interesting about that, especially when you're looking at some of those projects that you've mentioned, whether they be from our Imams or whether they be government institutions, as you mentioned with a few of those examples, is that they were very much designed to meet a need in that particular moment we were living in, but also had this arc of long-term sustainability and trying to meet the needs of a horizon that we may not even be able to anticipate. Do you see a tension there, or do you think that's very complementary to how you've seen the work with our Jamati and Imamati institutions and how they've been designed to fulfill the need of today, but also capture a longer narrative arc of tomorrow?
No, I don't think there's a tension. I think there is a clear vision of how this actually unfolds. The Imam of the time is always looking to establish in his toolkit, if I was to put it that way, responses to what he needs to do to improve quality of life.
Right.
And so there are manifestations of institutions and programs and projects that you can envisage today that may not have had the same form 500 years ago. But nevertheless, they are there and being either refreshed or rejuvenated with the tools and the technology of today for the benefit of the next generation, 2 generations, 5 generations. But there's always a focus, improvement of quality of life. And what are the ingredients that go into the tools that need to be created for quality of life?
Yeah, you know, I find that really, really insightful, because I don't know if we always appreciate how the Imam himself is creating these projects to make them responsive to those needs, but to your point, have them be iterative, have them kind of constantly be developing. When we look at, you know, large-scale programs that have happened throughout history, the reason that many of them kind of peter out over time is that they didn't adapt to the needs of that moment. They didn't adapt to the needs of that time. Can you kind of speak to that in terms of our Imam's vision as, and I might even say this, as a strategist in some ways, as a visionary, to be able to meet the moments of today, but know that there's enough cushion or know that there's enough agility built into the system to be able to kind of fulfill those needs of tomorrow?
Absolutely. Well, let me start by saying that it's perhaps important to have a little bit of a context. And the context is to understand what are the building blocks for the improvement of quality of life. So it's not an esoteric expression that's up in the stratosphere somewhere. There is a set of things that are fundamentally required in order to fulfill an individual having the quality of life that they need, that achieves certain things for them or their families. So let me kind of walk you through them. Then you can see how it maps out. The first is the notion of self-reliance. An individual must have the ability to control their own destiny. They must have the ability to be fulfilled. They must have dignity of purpose and the ability that they feel that they can control the outcomes and the decisions of their life. So the first thing is self-reliance. The second thing one has to have is health. If one is incapacitated in any way, you just don't have the control to be able to do what you would like to do with your life. So the ability to have access to health has been a fundamental notion from, the beginning of time, right? The third thing is education. And education is not just self-serving. And I mean that by saying, while it is important for education to enable you to have a good quality of life, it is not exclusively for that purpose. Education is also for two other purposes. One is to share that knowledge and that education for the benefit of others. And the second is to understand God's creation, right? Yes. So the third element would be education. The fourth would be the trusteeship that we have for the environment. The environment in which we have been placed has to be nurtured, has to be sustained, and has to coexist with human development. So the trusteeship of the environment is the fourth thing. The fifth, and this is important, it'll come back to one of the questions you asked a little earlier, is this notion of the importance of inclusivity and of a plural society, the ability to live with each other and to respect each other and to understand difference, as Hazar Imam has said so many times, as a strength and not as a weakness. That is an important fundamental building block. And the last would be the search for knowledge, for new knowledge that is going to be at the frontiers of knowledge that will become enabling knowledge, not the disabling knowledge.
Right.
So when you think about the construct of the AKDN today, you'll see that all of the three main pillars, social development, economic development, cultural development, all encompass those building blocks into their architecture as a way in which a response can be made to quality of life. So if one understands that as the premise, then one can understand that what you're building towards in terms of a legacy for the future are connected. Those 5 or 6 precepts that I mentioned, the building blocks, were there at the time of Hazrat Ali. Right. They were there at the time of Imam al-Muwaiz. They were there at the time of Jafar Sadiq. They're there at the time of Sultan Muhammad Shah. They're there today, the same building blocks for the Imam of the time today. And all of them, in their own times, were looking at ways in which they would be building legacy institutions to actually achieve that outcome. So, I mean, just to illustrate, if I might.
Sure.
Hazar Imam has been very particular sometimes on occasions to reference those legacies of the past and his positioning of them in terms of how he takes them forward today. So if you go back to the Aga Khan Medical College, Hazar Imam said at that time, in this Silver Jubilee year, celebrating my 25th anniversary of my accession to the Ismaili Imamat, today is a historic day in a true sense. The charter which His Excellency the President has been gracious enough to grant the new Aga Khan University creates the first university inspired by my family since Al-Hazar. Was founded by the Fatimid dynasty's capital of Cairo in 970. He's saying this 1,000 years before we laid the foundation stone of the Aga Khan Medical College on this site. So you can see that Hazar Imam is relating, tying things to past legacies. At that time, what medical practice looked like was different, but the notion of knowledge, Azhar University, the notion of knowledge today is different. And you will see that today, when you look at the Aga Khan University as it stands today, is at the forefront of knowledge creation.
Yes.
Just a continuum of legacy from the past.
It's quite powerful. Often in our community, we often, talk about how Mawlana Hazar Imam has had this ability to kind of see around corners in different ways, right? We've got to even colloquially be like, he was early on this, he was early on that. How did he know this was going to happen? I remember my dad, even personally, would refer back to one of his firmans where he talked about the knowledge society and computing becoming a huge part of our society and this ability to kind of see around corners. But what I'm understanding here and appreciating is that this is an extension of those building blocks. It's an extension of something that has been around for generations and has had a modern sort of spin to it, or a modern sort of elements of application to these fundamental core building blocks, which I don't think we appreciate enough.
Exactly. I think the thing to understand is this. The mandate has been the same since the time of Hazrat Ali. In Tutsing, when Hazar Imam spoke there to the Tutsing Evangelical Academy when he was given an award, I think it was 2005 or 2006, Hazar Imam is looking at a group of people in the audience, all from faith backgrounds. And he very clearly sort of says that, it's not understood what I do. People think of it as philanthropy and they think of it as entrepreneurship, but what they don't understand is that it's my mandate.
Yes.
It's not a choice.
I am fascinated and sometimes frustrated when representatives of the Western world, especially the Western media, try to describe the work of our Aga Khan Development Network in fields like education, health, the economy, media, and the building of social infrastructure, reflecting a certain historical tendency of the West to separate the secular from the religious. They often describe it either as philanthropy or entrepreneurship. What is not understood is that this work is for us a part of our institutional responsibility. It flows from the mandate of the office of the Imam to improve the quality of worldly life for the concerned communities.
This is not Mr. Gates who has an opportunity or an option to say, look, I've made wealth, fantastic, but I'd like to give some of my wealth towards good causes. That's a choice.
Yes.
For the Imam, that's not a choice.
Yes.
It's a responsibility, a mandate to do this irrespective. So if you think about it as a mandate that emerges from the time of the teachings of the Prophet, what is rooted in the Quran, in the Holy Quran, and the first Imam, Hazrat Ali, you'll see that that gives the capacity to say, what we're on is a trajectory that's been there for 1400 years.
Yes.
Right? And it's going to be there for another 1400 years and more. The responsibility of the Imam then is to see how in the age of the time he can enable and ensure that those functions continue to serve and build on people's ability to have a quality of life.
We talk about that mandate. Maybe I'll use that as a jumping off point to talk about how Mawlana Hazar Imam has been fulfilling that mandate for 65 years now. And before I kind of get into some of the milestones and the legacies, do you mind if I ask you kind of personally, as you've seen Mawlana Hazar Imam operate, try to execute on this mandate, what have you learned from him? What have you learned in terms of how he carries forward that mandate? What have you personally kind of seen that has maybe either surprised you or has kind of taught you yourself around how one carries through in a task so, if I can call it, overwhelming in some ways perhaps, or so gigantic in others? Just your reflections on looking at this particular Imam as we then talk about some of his milestones.
Well, I mean, I think I've been in the system now for a great period of time. It's now approaching 35 years.
Yes.
And what I would say I've noted are certain characteristics of how Hazar Imam goes about doing his work.
Yeah.
I think one of the great characteristics is patience. Hazar Imam has the ability to see into the long term, and he doesn't deviate just for local, immediate problems. He may have to react to them. For example, yes, we had to react to the emergency of COVID and those sorts of exigencies that occur, or conflicts in certain parts of the world, where, like Afghanistan or Syria before that. But for the most part, Hazar Imam has immense patience as he is building programs, as he is building institutions. I think the second thing that I've noticed is Hazar Imam's drive for excellence. He does not create things that are mediocre.
Yes.
And if they are at risk of being mediocre, then he would rather not continue with them and find a new architecture or a new approach to solving the problem than presenting a solution that is mediocrity built into it.
Yes.
He wants best practice. He pushes hard for excellence. I think the third thing I've noticed is that he will always himself consult. Hazar Imam feels that the best solutions are derived by being inclusive of people's views. And he doesn't have to.
No.
You know, he doesn't have to ask me or anybody else what our views are.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
he values that opinion. He may not agree with it, but he
even
values
that dissent, I imagine, by extension, to his, even that dissent to his perspective.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, so he always consults. He always looks for various different views, perspectives, even if they don't agree with him, because that tells him something as well before he comes to a decision. And so what I've always learned is that Hazar Imam's decisions are always informed. They're always, there's nothing that's like a rushed decision, ever. It's always carefully thought out, carefully considered. Sometimes people may think, you know, it takes a long time for the Imam to make a decision, but there is a reason for that. And it's based on the fact that it is always a considered decision, because that decision has a timeline to it. It impacts people's lives for another 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. So I would say the third thing is this notion of consultation being there.
Yes.
And I would say probably the fourth thing is that he always looks for consensus of view. And that's important also in being able to be inclusive as well. So over the years I've come to sort of realize that there is a certain approach that Hazar Imam has in how he actually conducts the business of the imamate. And these sort of characteristics are always there. So I never now feel so rushed to say, well, why is this decision not coming? Right. I know there's a good reason why it's not coming, and it's taking time because it needs thought before it would actually, before the Imam is ready to make a decision. So I think those are sort of 3 or 4 characteristics that come to my mind immediately in terms of my own experience with this.
I know, and that's quite fascinating, because not only have we been recipients of some of these core, essential sort of, if you can call them skills, or the temperament Hazar Imam's kind of brought to the work, but we've also kind of been able to experience the benefits from a societal perspective of this work, of taking this sort of approach of nothing short of excellence, of thoughtful deliberation. May I pick up on one of the ones that you mentioned, which is the first one around patience, and maybe kind of zoom that out for a second from a societal perspective, because I think there's a moment going on, at least in my interpretation right now, societally, where people want things quickly, that there is less perhaps compromise than ever before. There's more of sort of a puritanical sense. We've kind of seen it play out, at least in parts of the Western world, as polarization or division, or even some of the, amongst the 5 building blocks you mentioned, difference, perhaps valuing difference more, perhaps even valuing knowledge less. My question, I guess, is fundamentally, do you see the world the same way? Do you kind of see us entering this at least when we kind of zoom in from less of a legacy perspective to the now perspective? Is this how you kind of see the world from the perch that you've had and the experiences you've had? And the question thereon in is really about the institutions, what the institutions may need to do to kind of respond to that going forward.
So, I mean, the way I would consider that would be, today, as opposed to maybe 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, the speed at which information is generated is staggering.
Yes.
People's connectivity to each other through social networks and the like is incomprehensible in many ways. And I think what has happened because of that is that there has been, I think it was a comment I heard some years ago, there is bad information, good information, and no information. And it's a situation where there is such a plethora of information going out there which is unthought through. It's not characterized. People say what they want to say as they say it. People pick this up, make an interpretation. And so you've got this sort of mass of information going out there, which is causing, I think, one of the root problems of today. ignorance, lack of respect. I would say Hazrat Imam uses the word license quite often.
Yes.
Freedom is not a license to invade somebody else.
Yes, it's not
right?
the liberty to just do whatever you'd like.
It's not just the liberty to do what you want. Exactly right.
Right.
And I think this is what's happening, is that people are just taking license around what they consider to be their privileges and their freedoms to do whatever they want to do, however they want to do it, whenever they want to do it. Not just individuals, but sometimes even countries.
Yes, of course.
As well.
Of course.
So I think we have this explosion of information is causing, I think, a certain fragility.
Yes.
Or it's exposing, I think, cracks in a system. This is why the notion of pluralism is so important.
Yeah.
It is why the idea of respecting rather than denigrating others becomes so important. It is the way in which polarization can be bridged.
Yes.
And so I think there are 2 or 3 things we have to manage. One is information, how it's presented, what's presented, who's presenting it, and with what view, and what is the consequence of that information. From our point of view, I think one of the things we have to do from the point of view of the Jamat is to educate our younger generation better. The risks of information like this, social media, just being on these things without thought or concern or recognition even of the consequences of what they're actually doing is problematic. I think if you're going to be engaged, and everybody wants to be engaged, this is the thing of today, particularly in the younger generation. It's to be thoughtful about how you engage, to understand the risks of what you're going to face if things go awry. And there is no information out there that you can ever eradicate. Once it's out there, it's out there. You can't take it back. So you have to be, I think, very careful. So I would say one dynamic of today is that set of problems. I think another set of dynamics of today is what we're seeing is nationalistic tendencies, whether it's in the United States or in other countries, which again sort of drills down to people wanting to be exclusive rather than inclusive.
Yes.
And that's a challenge that we have to actually work through. And I think that's why Hazrat Imam has been very patient, very methodical in ensuring that we are building institutions and we're building an approach that talks about pluralism. And I think that's why over the last 10 years or 15 years or so, certainly through till if you look back to the Golden Jubilee, you'll note that there isn't a single speech that Hazrat Imam makes where he doesn't refer to this notion of pluralism. It is so fundamentally important to the ability for human society to function harmoniously. And I think, as you look at the problems of today, it's driven by the antithesis of pluralism. It's the actual opposite. And we just have to be, again, patient, thoughtful in our approach to working towards educating people that there is less to be afraid of than more to be afraid of by difference. Because that's what's driving it at the end of the day. It's this notion of difference being something that's going to hurt you. You're not my color, you're not my gender, you're not my whatever it may be.
You're a threat.
And you're a threat.
Exactly.
You're a threat. That we have to overcome. And whether it's with the Muslim world or even with the Christian world for that matter, these fissures exist. And that's what I think we have to try and overcome. And I think that's what Hazrat Imam is pushing.
Do you mind if I kind of pick up on something that you mentioned there? And I know you kind of made a comment towards the youth, but I might kind of broaden it a bit, which is those individuals who clearly have seen the work of the Imam, the values that he speaks of over the course of the last 65 years, they've embodied. They want to, live by. They want to help. They want to bridge those inequities that they see amongst the pillars and the building blocks you've mentioned. But they also see an opportunity for speed. They also see an opportunity for social media actually allows us to do things faster, bridge those inequities much quicker, not having to wait decades for certain things. I'd be curious to get your reflections on that as we see the methodical patience of our Imam viewing, as we've been discussing, legacy that extends significantly beyond even his own imamate. And then these moments that we find ourselves in as individuals that'll be on this earth for a shorter period of time to say, how do we take action now? Shouldn't we do it fast? Shouldn't we accelerate? Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I've been asked that question before, actually, by some of the younger generation.
Yeah.
And my response to them has always been that you have to find the right balance between efficiency, let's call this efficiency,
Okay.
And thought-less reaction. So what I mean by that is people want instant answers to this, but there is, as Hazar Imam has said in the past, there's no Nescafe solution. It's not an instant coffee that you can just, come up with an answer. So my response to them has been, all right, if we're going to look at how we can be more efficient in the way that we do work, speed things up, we're no longer putting things in the mail so that it takes 3 weeks to get a letter, we can get it in less than 3 seconds. It is to think before you write. It is to think before you speak. That's not to say you don't write and you don't speak. It is to say before you hit the send button on an email, before you hit the send button on an Instagram, think, pause, take that 2 seconds, which isn't 3 days in the mail.
Yes.
It's just that extra 2 seconds or 3 seconds to say, is this what I want to send out now? And am I comfortable with it? Because you can't retract it. So it's a question of finding the mental discipline, if I was to put it to you that way. It's the mental discipline to deal with the speed at which things are happening today, so that you don't become captive to the new technology which is driving you in a particular supersonic Mach 10 direction, to you being able to control it, to say, I don't have to go at Mach 10, but I can go at Mach 1. I can pace it. That's not to say that you're saying don't improve and don't do things in a particular way, but it is to measure it and for you to be in control of it rather than being controlled by it.
Right.
That's what I've usually said to younger people.
As we kind of circle in on the legacy, 65 years we've talked about, there's many milestones, there's many projects, there's many initiatives. From where you stand, which ones or how do you kind of see these being transformed into what we've been talking about as a through line of our conversation, into legacies? How do these milestones or these events or these projects turn into extensions of the legacies that we've been talking about from the longitudinal perspective of the Imamate?
Well, what I would say is that if you look at the last 60 or 65 years, Hazar Imam has used certain anniversaries during this last 65 years as essential launch points for strategies that do have this legacy dynamic to them. If one could only look back, and you would see that on the 10th anniversary in 1967 was the year in which Hazar Imam established the Aga Khan Foundation in Geneva. This was the sort of first piece of what ultimately then becomes the AKDN, a network of 10 agencies and multiple areas of endeavor, was in 1967. In 1977, what did Hazar Imam do? He established the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Another milestone. And what is important, if you think about the Institute of Ismaili Studies, is that it is the first institution of its kind today that is dedicated to Shia studies. Today, anybody who wants to know anything about Shia studies or the Shia world, their first point of reference is the Institute of Ismaili Studies. That is where we have the depository of Shia scholarship. It is where all of these publications that you've seen over the last 10, 20 years that have taken appropriate scholarship to the content of those books that have been published. They are authentic. And it has been fundamentally important to ensure that in the wider world today, Shia Islam is understood correctly. Its history, its trajectory, its cultures, its traditions, its theology even,
Yes.
has been understood correctly. That's a legacy, because that's going to be there for decades, if not centuries, to come.
Yes.
Something like that. It was also the year in which the award for architecture was established. And you might say, well, why an award for architecture? Again, it's a legacy because it bridges this notion of the environment with
Yes.
the built environment and spaces which are important for society to function in harmoniously.
Yes.
So if you look at the award kinds of projects, they're not pretty buildings necessarily.
Yeah.
They're buildings in which one is assessing how have they responded to the needs of a community.
Right.
What have they done that's been creative,
Yes.
right, and responsible to the environment itself. That's another set of legacies, not necessarily in the award itself, but in the way in which we think about the built environment and what it does and what its impact is. So you can see that over the course of these last 65 years, the Silver Jubilee was a launch point for the Ismaili centers. You know, we're sitting in an Ismaili center today. You might ask, well, what's the importance of an Ismaili center?
Yeah.
They are a representation of the values and ethics of the Ismaili Muslim community. They are spaces for ambassadorial dialogue. They are there to ensure that we have the ability to be inclusive
Yes.
in our conversations.
Yes.
That we have the ability to engage in a space that is welcoming and that reflects who we are as a community. These are the reasons why these Ismaili centers have been built and why Hazar Imam has spent so much time and attention to their physical architecture as well. They make a statement.
Yes.
In how they've been constructed as well. Aga Khan University as well.
Yes.
And then you go on at the time, I would say 1986. What was important about that milestone, 86, 87, was the Ismaili Constitution.
Right.
It was signed on Hazar Imam's 50th birthday, promulgated on the 30th anniversary in 87. The Constitution brought together a global community, that this is in 87. In 1990, the Soviet Union hadn't yet come down. But here's the Imam being able to see what's behind that wall.
Yes.
There was a Jamat in Tajikistan, in Afghanistan, in Central Asia, in Western China, that had never been seen before.
Yes.
Our constitution, or the Ismaili constitution, was able to bring that together in a way that tied every murid from any part of the world, from any background, to the Imam of the time. It has a legacy, and it's not like constitutions are new.
No.
They're not. I mean, you can go back to Qadi Noman.
Right.
Constitutions existed then.
Right.
It's another legacy. And then when you come to the Golden Jubilee, I mean, there are a number of different things that Hazar Imam did in and around the Jubilee period. But again, I tie it back to tying legacies of the past. You know, when Hazar Imam was, during the Golden Jubilee year in 2007, went to Egypt to open the Dar al-Amr. And at the time, what does Hazar Imam say in his speech? He says, you know, firstly, I have found that this endeavor has provided for me personally, a profound sense of connection with my own ancestors, the Fatimid Caliphs, who founded Cairo, and who laid its physical and cultural foundations 1,000 years ago. Physical and cultural foundations, 1,000 years ago. To reach back across 35 generations. So he's counting back to the 14th Imam. To reach back 35 generations and to be able to engage in the restoration of their legacy. In the restoration of their legacy is a rare and stirring privilege. A rare and stirring privilege. How could I not be affected seeing the remains of the original Fatimid walls and towers that protected this city when they founded it? And this experience has special meaning for me as I mark my own 50th year as the Imam of the Shia Ismaili Muslims. That's how Hazar Imam is looking backwards.
Yeah.
He's looking back and saying, here is a legacy, Azhar Park.
Yes.
Azhar Park is the largest green lung in the Middle East. Largest green. It was built on a rubbish dump that was there for 500 years.
Yes.
500 years. Look at the transformational characteristics. Legacies need to be transformative. They need to change what is happening in a society or an individual.
Yes.
Think of how Hazar Park has changed Egypt.
Yes.
How it has brought people together. You can sit in Hazar Park in this beautiful green environment, and you will see people from every background, every faith group, sitting there, enjoying the space with their families. Think of the social cohesion. Mm-hmm. Think of the economic development in the Dar al-Amma around it.
Yes.
What it did to slums. It revitalized a whole community that had been in poverty for centuries. That's a legacy.
Yes.
And that's how, when I tie legacies to some of the things that the Imam has done in his 65 years, you can look back and you can begin to tie some of these things not only to institutions that were located with legacies of the past,
yes,
but are now going to leave new legacies for the future. They're building onto the future.
And every single one of them substantive, right?
Substantive.
Not cosmetic, not performative, not not designed to simply meet the moment, to try to say, oh no, what's the need right now? Let us get in front of that and try to get some kudos for what we've done. Thoughtful,
absolutely,
right? Thoughtful and meeting the need, but also designed for sustainability. And I think one thing I'm taking away from this conversation is, as much as we sit at home and look at the 65 years, we zoom out and we think how special it has been to observe, to see the residual impacts of. We then see our Imam kind of zooming out himself and looking at the longitudinal lens of several hundred years beyond that and saying, I'm just a small part of this longitudinal sort of perspective that dates even further back and has even deeper roots.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you've also got things which are not quite so physically apparent.
Right.
For example, during the whole sort of Golden Jubilee period, there was a whole set of strategies around knowledge partnerships with tertiary institutions,
yes,
to be at the forefront of the knowledge society. AKU today is 40 years old, not very old,
yes,
by university standards.
Yes.
Hazar may be 1,000 years old, and we like to claim it to be the first university of its kind in the world. But in relative terms, AKU is young. But yet, if you look and see where it's located in the rankings
yes,
of research universities, it's in the top 100
right,
after 35 years. We have partnerships today that are looking at stem cell research for medical applications that would be not in the West necessarily, but in Asia,
yes,
in Africa.
yes.
These knowledge bridges are essential to being able to use new knowledge for the betterment of human society, their health conditions, and other things that we may be looking to do at the same time. So this notion of being at the forefront, again, of the knowledge society is another legacy.
Yes.
And it transforms and manifests itself in different ways. But that is one of the other, I would say, areas of focus that the Imam has had. Search for new knowledge that can be used for the betterment of society. It's not a visible program that you can see out there, but we must have, I would say, 30 plus agreements between the University of Central Asia, Aga Khan University,
yes,
with almost every tertiary educational institution of repute in the world today. We're doing something with them or another, whether it's in Europe or in North America. So that's another sort of drive that I would say will leave a legacy, this search for new knowledge and the capacity to be able to acquire it.
I want to kind of reflect on these 65 years, and I hope this isn't semantics, but I want to ask you, this is an anniversary, not a jubilee. And I know we kind of, and so I just love your thoughts on that, 65-year anniversary versus a jubilee. The difference there, is there a difference? And why is this, for example, not a jubilee?
So I think it's a very good question. And perhaps I should start by just giving again a little bit of context
Sure.
to this idea of a jubilee. And we just happened to be celebrating just a few days ago Her Majesty the Queen's
right.
Platinum Jubilee, the 70th year of her reign. So this idea of jubilees is not exclusive to the Ismaili Imams of
Yes.
late. It is rooted in a tradition that started in India, in the Indian subcontinent at the time of the Mughals. So it goes back to many personages of importance commemorating their anniversaries through the means of what was called a jubilee, which had pageant, it had ceremony, it had all of these sort of trappings associated with it. The Queen's Jubilee that you saw a couple of weeks ago had all of the pageant and the ceremony, etc. Sultan Mahmud Shah, because the Imamat was in India, in the subcontinent of the time, had adopted this notion of celebrating the Imam's anniversaries through this modality. But he wanted to do something a little different, which was a jubilee is an opportunity to do two things. It is usually requested by the Jamat of the Imam. We would like to commemorate this anniversary as a jubilee.
Yes.
And in doing so, it is a reaffirmation of our bay'ah,
Yes.
and it is an opportunity for us to present to the Imam of the time a gift,
Yes.
what we call a nazrana. And Sultan Mahmud Shah wanted to use that opportunity of a jubilee, to use that nazrana as a means by which he could launch a legacy project.
Yes.
He used those money for the establishment or the seed money for Diamond Trust Bank. That is why it is called Diamond Trust Bank.
Right.
Or Jubilee Insurance Company.
Right.
It was the gift of the Jamat through a particular means, but what is important is the understanding that those means, that gift,
Yes.
was used for the benefit of the Jamat through a legacy project. Okay? During Hazar Imam's time, there have been about 7 anniversaries, of which 3 have been jubilees, so silver, golden, and diamond. And again, the Jamat went to the Imam and asked for it to be commemorated as a jubilee, which the Imam accepted. So it's not a jubilee until he accepts it, is the premise. And then that allows for the Jamat to offer a gift. And Hazar Imam in the Golden Jubilee made it clear that one of the traditions that goes back to Hazrat Ali of gifting included the notion of gifting your time and knowledge.
Yes.
So, and what has he done with that capacity? It's the same principle. Everything that was gifted to the Imam from the Jamaat through Nazrana, either monetary or time and knowledge, has been used for the deployment of those resources for the benefit of the Jamaat across all institutions. So there are anniversaries and there are jubilees, but the jubilees take you to another level. It is also through this notion of being able to reaffirm our bayat. The Imam was very gracious to be able to say, to allow that to take place in the form of a tradition and a practice of the Imam wearing his regalia, the leaders wearing their regalia, the family members of the Imam wearing their regalia, the presentation of the accoutrements of the office of the Imam. All of these things were part of a frame of how we would actually, in a formalized way, present that submission of our real allegiance to the Imam of the time. And it is rooted in historical things. The Imam's outfit has a historical significance to it, right? As with all of the other elements around it. And Hazar Imam was very gracious that he wanted the Jamaat to be invited into his home. So the Jubilee ceremony took place at his home in Iglamont.
Right.
And there was a symbolism behind it. It was that the Imam wanted the Jamaat across the whole world to know that he is inviting them to his home. So the Jubilee celebration itself, or the ceremony itself, has a lot of these symbolic gestures embedded in them as well. But the principle is reaffirmation of our bay'ah and the ability to present a gift to the Imam of the time, which can then be redeployed
Yes.
by the Imam for the benefit of the Jamat.
You know, I've got so many more questions, but we're short on time. So how about we do this? Do you mind if I'll spring this on you, throw a bit of a lightning round at you? Some personal questions, why not? And then I've got some final substantive question I want to hear from you on. But do you mind if I just throw a couple of things at you, just see where you stand on them?
Throw.
Let me throw a softball at you. Canada or the United States? Now you are an American, am I right by saying that?
I'm British.
You're British. Okay, so you're British, but you lived in the United States.
I did. I am American.
So let
too.
me throw the third one: Canada, USA, or England? What's the choice?
England.
Oh, the correct answer is Canada. I gave you a softball there. It was a softball. Okay, we're sitting here in Toronto. You live in Ottawa, right?
Indeed.
Ottawa or Toronto?
Toronto.
Calgary's the right answer. Once again.
But that wasn't a choice.
Calgary was.
That was not a choice.
Think outside the box here, Dr. Eboo.
Now,
Calgary,
if you'd said Stampede, I would have said Calgary.
it is the Calgary Stampede right now. When we are
I have a pair
celebrating.
of boots and I have a hat.
I look forward to seeing you at the grandstand.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to this. Fill in the blank for me. In your household, right? Kushali is not complete without. Fill in the blank. In your household, Kushali is not complete without. It could be an activity, it could be food, it could be, but be specific. It's not complete without what?
Biryani.
Biryani. Another question for you. You know, let's get a little serious for a second. If one skill or characteristic or trait that you've observed, and we talked about how you've been in these institutions for such a long time now, had the unique privilege of having an intimate working relationship with Mawlana Hazar Imam. One skill, characteristic, or trait you've learned from Mawlana Hazar Imam as you've experienced working with him, have you experienced dealing with him?
Humility. No question in my mind. Humility. You can see that the Imam is the Imam of the time, but his humility and how he approaches you, how he approaches people, whether they're members of his Jamat or whether they are heads of state, there is a humility in his demeanor, there's a humility in his voice, there's a humility in his language, there's a humility in his approach. It is extraordinary. You have to just look at him and you'll realize that here is a person who has, he's the Imam of a major community in the world who has so many things, but yet he is humble. And it's a characteristic I like to tell other leaders that we need to emulate. As much as we can, is never lose sight of the fact that we are actually serving at his pleasure to serve his Jamat.
Right.
And we should never let that go to our heads.
The final question, I want to loop back to something you'd made mention of, which is that 2017 homage ceremony. At that moment you were chair of the LIF, you had an opportunity to represent the global Jamat. Whether it's a story or an anecdote or a memory you have of that, to round us out as we talk about Mawlana Hazar Imam's 65 years, would you mind sharing something from that special day that you got to experience representing the worldwide Jamat?
Well, I would say there are of course many anecdotes and stories around it, but I would say first of all it's important for the Jamat to know the amount of work that went in globally to make that day a reality. Whether it was prepping the singers of the Ginan who were singing the Ginan during the procession, whether it was the preparation of the Nasheed al-Imama as a live performance. This was recorded in Toronto with the 70-piece Toronto Symphony Orchestra, and you're now going to try and play that with 12 people?
Yeah.
The extraordinary I would say outpouring of love and affection to make this day happen and the joy that went in it. So I wouldn't want anybody to simply think that because I was the chairman at the time that it's associated with me necessarily.
Yeah,
it is that I am also part of, and I was a part of, a much larger group of people that fed into the creation of this event. I mentioned the symbolism of many things.
Yes.
The symbolism of being invited into Hazar Imam's house, the symbolism of the regalia that was there, which was it's a powerful moment when you think about it. That when the Imam wears on his sherwani buttons that were the same ones worn by Sultan Muhammad Shah at his jubilee. You know,
Yeah.
these are what I would call elements of attention to detail.
Yes.
That make the significance of it. But if you want a humor, I wouldn't say humorous, but a slightly light-hearted anecdote.
I'd love it. Yeah.
We were going to start our procession, which was maybe 1 kilometer long, from the Secretariat at Eglemont down to Hazar Imam's residence,
Right.
along the main road, and it was supposed to start at 9 o'clock, and it was pouring with rain.
Yes.
And we thought, how are we going to do this? You know, we had umbrellas, which were transparent umbrellas, by
Yes.
the way, so that you could actually see through them.
Who was in them, or
And
who was behind them?
you know, were we going to get everybody to be carrying umbrellas as we walked down this procession? And it was, you know, pouring with rain. Everybody's wearing saris and outfits, and you're going to get soaked. And so there was this sort of moment of high anxiety.
Yes.
Of how do we delay? How long do we delay? You know, all of these kinds of questions that you know, organizers
Yes.
have to think about. And one of the leaders of the Jamat said, what we have to do today is to pray. So everybody's going to take out a salawat right now, and literally the sky cleared, and we had about 22 minutes between the next big shower as it came down, and it took us 22 minutes to get down to
That's
the end,
amazing. Yeah.
play the Nasheed al-Imama, and then go into Hazar Imam's residence, and then it started to rain again.
That's an incredible
So you can look at that how you will, but we will always look back and smile on that, and you'd have to say to yourself, you know, there is something about having that
Yes.
absolutely unequivocal faith in a particular moment.
Absolutely. Dr. Eboo, thank you so much for this conversation as we commemorate the 65 years of Imamat of our Mawlana Hazar Imam. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your insights, and I really appreciate you sharing so candidly your thoughts and your stories. So thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We conclude this evening's Friday Night Reflections with our soulful sounds. Tonight's piece is the latest track by Calgary-based K4 entitled Euphoria. This piece speaks to the strength gained through Hazar Imam's continued love and guidance. I also want to say thank you for joining us this evening as we say goodbye. I hope that you have had a wonderful weekend, either with cake or sherbet, or with the Stampede's famous mini donuts. And it's yee-haw or yahoo, it's all good. Don't worry about it, former Mayor Nenshi. You are the former mayor now, so it doesn't matter to you anymore. Keep safe, have a great evening, and one more thing. Tonight is the 75th episode of Friday Night Reflections. And doing 75 of anything is a huge feat, but having seen the work that these tireless individuals put into Friday Night Reflections, it's even more impressive. The coordination, the logistics, the interviews, the sacrifice in editing. So to all that are involved in Friday Night Reflections, it's not just the folks that are in front of the camera. In fact, right now, there are 4 people here that are helping me. There's one on the camera, one with the teleprompter, one with the light, one just folding his arms looking very authoritative. I don't know what he does. Regardless, all the people here who've helped put Friday Night Reflections together over the past couple of years, kudos to you and congratulations. And thank you for putting out something that has kept our community together and connected over the past couple of years. So without further ado, here is K4. Have a great Imamat Day weekend. We'll see you very soon. And Yali Madad.
Yeah, yeah. Around the world we united, green and red got us feeling like flying. I never felt so excited, side to side, celebrate all the times we tried. No, no, you would never put us to the side. No, no, even when we wanna cry. No, they always get us to the fight. No, no, yeah.
Taking a breath but falling apart. I don't wanna lose my way. Believing in more and giving my heart to him, so I keep my strength.
It's like euphoria. When we suffer, you never go away. It's like euphoria. When it's hard, we will never go astray. Ooh. When we suffer, you never go away. Ooh. When it's hard, we will never go astray.
What holds my head so high is what I can't see. Keeps me going every time. So close.
I'ma tell you why. You remind me of a rage shining through the clouds, with the blessing of a life, birds in the sky, freedom to survive, cause my faith is my mind, yeah. Your love is a one-of-a-kind feeling. True to myself is some healing. I could give you 1,000 other reasons for every single song that I write, word that I rhyme, bump on the right, blink of an eye. You're at my side, even in the night and day. I've been lost and found through the mazes of life, but you